I want you to take a second, just like imagine your most sensitive medical information. I mean, the complete file.
Right, absolutely everything.
Yeah, your blood type, your allergy to penicillin, that weird rash you had 5 years ago. I mean, your genetic markers, your mental health history, just the works.
The entire digital picture of your health.
Exactly. Now, imagine you're walking through the sliding glass doors of, a major hospital. You go to the front desk, you hand over your ID, and they pull up that exact file on their screen.
Happens thousands of times a day.
Right. And here's my question for you. In that massive building, the hundreds of rooms and thousands of employees, exactly who is responsible for keeping that specific file safe?
People definitely want a simple answer to that.
We really do. Much like a medical diagnosis, you expect precision. Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged line, and the doctor just points and says, there is the problem.
Yeah, very linear thought process.
And we want the same clarity for our data. We want one person holding the key.
But, I mean, the problem with that desire for a single key is that it just doesn't reflect the reality of modern medicine.
Not at all.
Our expectation is entirely linear, like you said. I give you my data, you put it in a safe, you lock it. But looking at the source material for today's deep dive...
Which is the DGPSI Integrating Governance Framework, right?
Exactly. The DGPSI Integrated Governance Framework for Healthcare Data Fiduciaries. And when you read it, we see that the linear model is completely obsolete.
Yeah, for context, DGPSI stands for the Data Governance, Privacy, and Security Index.
Right. And this specific framework was designed to really untangle this incredibly complex architecture of trust in the medical sector. It outlines how medical data is actually governed today.
Which is basically our mission for today. We're going to track your medical file as it moves through this modern system, from like the IT department in the basement all the way up to the overarching hospital brand on the billboard.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. And to start, we have to address the most striking claim from the entire framework. It states that every data breach is also a patient safety event.
Oh, yeah. That sentence alone requires a massive shift in how we understand cybersecurity.
Because historically, if someone mentions a data breach, your mind immediately goes to, what, a stolen credit card number?
Right, or a compromised bank account. I mean, the worst case scenario is usually financial ruin or identity theft.
Which is bad, obviously.
Oh, for sure. But this framework forces us to realize that in a clinical setting, the digital and the physical, they are no longer separate domains.
Let's visualize that for a second. Imagine a hospital gets hit by a ransomware attack. The malicious software locks down the entire internal network.
Everything just stops.
Yeah, the screens of the nurse's station go completely black. Now, in a traditional corporate setting, that's just an IT disaster. Everyone goes home while the tech team fixes the servers.
It's an inconvenience.
Right. But in a hospital, a nurse is standing in the ICU needing to administer a critical medication, and they suddenly cannot verify the patient's dosage or check for deadly drug interactions.
Because the data is locked?
Exactly. The nurse is forced to guess based on memory, and if they guess wrong, the patient suffers physical harm. That digital lock on the data just caused a lethal physical outcome.
It's terrifying when you put it like that.
Wait, so does that mean the old model of separating the IT guys from the clinical doctors is fundamentally broken?
Well, it's worse than broken. It is a massive liability.
A liability.
Absolutely. The framework highlights that treating data security and patient safety as like separate silos is a really dangerous illusion.
Right.
Because if a hacker alters a medical record to remove an allergy warning, that IT breach instantly becomes a clinical crisis.
Wow, yeah. So because of this undeniable link, the framework proposes that hospitals must completely restructure their internal management.
They have to. They can no longer afford to have the computer experts in one wing and the medical experts in another.
Right. And the proposed solution is something the text calls an integrated compliance team.
Yes, the new triumvirate.
Yeah. It mandates that 3 specific people must sit at the same table to manage this new reality. So you have the CISO, which is the Chief Information Security Officer.
Right, the tech side.
Then the DPO, the Data Protection Officer. And crucially, the PSO, the Patient Safety Officer.
Your clinical side.
Exactly. You have the top tech executive, the top privacy executive, and the top clinical safety executive. I'm trying to picture how this works in practice. Is it like a three-legged stool where they're all just supporting the same overarching goal of hospital management?
I mean, a stool is a bit too passive.
Okay, fair.
They aren't just sitting there supporting weight. They are actively managing an incredibly volatile environment. A better way to look at it is an air traffic control tower.
Oh, I like that. Okay, walk me through the control tower.
So in this tower, the CISO is monitoring the radar, the digital infrastructure, the firewalls, the server loads.
Right.
The DPO is reviewing the passenger manifests, basically ensuring privacy, making sure only authorized personnel are looking at sensitive data.
Making sure nobody is sneaking on board.
Exactly. And then the PSO is responsible for making sure the planes don't actually crash into each other on the runway. The clinical outcomes.
So for decades, these three people were in entirely different buildings looking at different screens.
Literally completely separate.
But the framework forces them to the exact same room, looking at the exact same screen, because a failure on the radar means a crash on the runway.
You nailed it.
But wait, if they are in the same room sharing equal authority, does that mean the patient safety officer has the power to veto an IT decision?
How do you mean?
Well, say the CISO wants to take the hospital's main database offline for like a routine software update at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Normally, the IT department just sends out an email and shuts it down. Can the PSO step in and stop that?
Absolutely. They can entirely veto it. And that is the really revolutionary part of this integrated compliance plan. Yeah, the framework specifies that this team is jointly responsible for 3 distinct pillars of regulation. You have ITA 2000, DPDPA, and NABH. Let's look at how your 2.00 AM software update scenario plays out across those 3 pillars.
Let's do it. So what happens under ITA 2000?
Well, ITA 2000 is the Information Technology Act. It governs the traditional digital infrastructure.
The nuts and bolts.
Right. Under those rules, if a server crashes or goes offline for an update, it is simply categorized as an uptime failure. It's an annoyance. The CISO's job is just to get it back online.
Okay, and what about the DPDPA?
That is the data protection framework. It focuses on the legal rights of the individual whose data is stored.
Right, privacy stuff.
Yeah. Under the DPDPA, a server going offline isn't necessarily a crisis unless the data actually leaks to an unauthorized party. The DPO is just watching to ensure privacy is maintained during the outage.
Which brings us to the third pillar, the NABH. These are the hospital accreditation and clinical safety standards. This is the patient safety officer's territory.
And this is where the perspective radically changes.
How so?
Under NABH, that same 2.00 AM server outage means the life support telemetry in the neonatal ward loses its connection to the central monitoring station.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it means the emergency room doctors cannot access the blood bank database for an incoming trauma patient. It is no longer just an uptime failure.
It's a massive clinical crisis.
Exactly.
So by forcing these 3 frameworks together, a data breach is completely redefined.
Completely.
It's no longer just unauthorized access to a network. It's any compromise of digital integrity that jeopardizes a clinical outcome. I mean, the computer experts are forced to think like doctors, and the doctors are forced to think like computer experts.
Yeah, every software update, server migration, or firewall adjustment must be evaluated through the lens of, could a failure here harm the patient in the bed? It is a brilliant internal mechanism.
Okay, so we have this unified air traffic control tower, this CISO, DPO, and PSO securing the internal operations of the hospital building. They are guarding your specific medical file with this new integrated approach.
That's the internal side, yes.
But here's the thing. My file rarely stays in just one building. Modern medicine is a network.
Very true.
So what happens to my data when the hospital outsources my MRI to a third-party diagnostic center across town? Does that internal air traffic control tower still protect me?
Well, this is exactly where the framework moves from internal team structures to external collaborations. And the complexity, it multiplies instantly.
I can imagine.
The text specifically highlights that diagnostic centers operate independently. They aren't just passively storing your MRI or blood work in a digital vault.
They're actually doing something with it.
Exactly. They're actively processing it, applying their own algorithms, analyzing the results, and crucially, making clinical determinations.
Wait, so because they are making the clinical decisions, they are also determining the patient safety actions?
Yes.
If the third-party lab's diagnostic software has a glitch and misreads the density of a tumor on an MRI, the main hospital surgeon is going to operate based on that flawed data.
The causality is direct there. The external center's data processing failure translates directly into physical harm on the main hospital's operating table.
That's terrifying.
But the framework goes beyond just sending a blood sample or an MRI across town. It addresses the reality of hospitals providing support to subordinate hospitals.
Like what?
We are talking about live telemedicine consults and remote surgeries.
Oh, right. And this is where the text introduces the concept of joint data fiduciaries and the need for a recognized boundary of data responsibility.
Yes, setting legal boundaries.
Honestly, I struggle with how this works in practice. I mean, a recognized boundary sounds great on a legal contract, but let's look at a live remote surgery.
Okay, let's play it out.
You have a world-class surgeon at a main hospital using a robotic console. The patient, and therefore the patient's data, is physically located at a subordinate hospital 100 miles away. The data is flowing back and forth in milliseconds. Let's say a network lag occurs, causing the robotic scalpel to slip, injuring the patient. How do you draw a boundary line in a fiber optic cable? Who actually owns that slip-up?
Well, drawing that line is incredibly difficult, which is precisely why the framework insists institutions must pre-negotiate their liabilities before the patient is ever prepped for surgery.
They have to figure it out beforehand.
Exactly. They cannot wait for the scalpel to slip to figure out who is responsible.
But how does a joint data fiduciary contract actually accomplish that mechanically? The data stream is continuous.
It works by legally segmenting a continuous technical process.
Segmenting it.
Yeah. The contract essentially maps out the entire data pipeline and assigns accountability to every single millimeter of it.
Give me an example.
So, for example, the contract will stipulate that the main hospital is legally responsible for the data from the moment it leaves the surgeon's console until it hits the subordinate hospital's external firewall.
Okay, so that is the transmission phase.
Right. And then the subordinate hospital assumes liability from the firewall down to the physical robotic arm. That is the reception and execution phase.
I see. It acts almost like a relay race.
Exactly like that.
There is a defined moment where the baton is passed. So if the scalpel slips, investigators just look at the server logs.
Precisely.
If the lag happened during transmission, the main hospital's IT department and, their internal CISO, DPO, PSO team takes the fall. But if the lag happened because the subordinate hospital's local network was congested, they own the liability.
Yes. Because without that defined boundary, a patient harmed in a remote surgery would be caught in an endless bureaucratic nightmare.
Oh, the finger pointing would be out of control.
Absolutely. The main hospital would point the finger at the subordinate hospital, and the subordinate hospital would point right back.
Right.
The joint data fiduciary framework forces them to settle their inter-se status, meaning their legal relationship to one another, so the patient is protected by a clear chain of accountability.
Okay, so we've looked at two separate hospital buildings talking to each other. What about the actual human beings walking the halls? Because the framework doesn't stop at institutional networks. It zeroes in on the individual doctors, too.
Ah, yes. The consulting doctors, or what we can think of as the freelancers.
The freelancers.
Yeah, this is perhaps the most disruptive concept in the entire document.
Let's follow my medical file again. So I am lying in a bed at the main hospital. A specialist walks into my room. They're wearing a white fleece with the hospital's logo embroidered on the chest. They pull up my file on their tablet.
Seems pretty standard.
Right. Naturally, I assume this person is an employee of the hospital and that my data is safe inside the hospital's network. But the text explicitly states some doctors may have employment status, while most may not. Most may not.
Right. That fleece with the logo is often just marketing.
Just marketing.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The reality is that many specialists and consulting doctors operate as independent professional entities. They are granted privileges to treat patients at the hospital, but that are not actually employees.
Wait, if they are not employees, does that mean the person standing next to my bed holding my chart isn't legally bound by the hospital's internal data systems?
Well, they are bound by professional ethics, obviously, but from a data governance perspective, they are making independent decisions about how your information is processed.
Wow.
Think about the mechanics of modern medical consulting. That specialist might review your file at the hospital, but then they download your blood work and MRI scans to their personal encrypted iPad so they can review the case at home over the weekend.
So the moment they download my file to their iPad, they become their own independent data processing entity.
Yes, they become a microfiduciary.
A microfiduciary.
Yeah. And this forces the hospital to establish a legal relationship regarding your information with the very doctor walking their own halls.
Are they acting independently?
Exactly. Do they need a joint fiduciary agreement just like the subordinate hospital did? If that specialist leaves their iPad in a coffee shop, the hospital needs a legal mechanism to prove the data breach occurred outside their control.
That completely shatters the illusion of the hospital as a single unified monolith. The building you are standing in and the doctor treating you might be entirely separate legal entities.
They very often are.
But the framework also zooms out to the opposite extreme, doesn't it?
Right.
We go from the micro level of the freelancer to the macro level of the massive corporate umbrella. It highlights that most hospitals today operate under a brand-sharing program.
This business model dominates modern healthcare, and it introduces the final massive layer of data complexity we need to unpack.
The text explains that an umbrella brand attracts the patient, but independent franchise hospitals actually render the service.
Right.
When I read this, I immediately thought of a major hotel franchise. Like you're driving down the highway and you see the giant neon sign for a famous luxury hotel.
Sure.
That sign gets you to pull off the exit. You trust the brand. You expect a certain quality of mattress, a specific standard of cleanliness. But the actual building is owned by a local independent operator. The local owner is the one actually washing the sheets.
The structure is identical to that, but the stakes are vastly different.
Right, obviously.
In the hotel scenario, the worst outcome of a local owner cutting corners is a lumpy mattress. But in the healthcare franchise model, a local independent owner cutting corners means your highly sensitive health data is exposed.
Because the patient trusts the giant neon medical sign. They go to that specific clinic because of the famous name. They assume that massive corporation is fiercely protecting their data.
But the reality is that the local franchisee is the one updating the servers and managing the access logs.
Exactly. So how does the DGPSI framework bridge the gap between the patient's trust in the umbrella brand and the legal reality of the local operator?
It introduces the concept of the super data fiduciary.
Super data fiduciary.
Yes. The framework states that in brand sharing programs, the umbrella brand must take on this super status.
But how does a super data fiduciary actually enforce security on a local independent franchisee? If the local clinic owner decides they just don't want to spend the money to upgrade their cybersecurity software, how does the overarching brand force them to do it?
Through the franchise agreement itself. The legal mechanism is tied directly to the use of the logo.
Ah, I see.
The super data fiduciary says, if you want to put our famous, trusted name on your building, you must submit to centralized IT audits. You must implement our specific encryption standards, and you must adopt our integrated compliance model.
Wait, you mean that air traffic control tower we discussed at the beginning?
Exactly.
The CSO, DPO, and PSO?
Yes, the internal hospital team. The super data fiduciary's job is to ensure that exact control tower model cascades down into every single franchise clinic operating under their banner.
Wow.
They cannot just license their name and wash their hands of the data liability. If a local franchise experiences a data breach, the umbrella brand is held accountable because they profited from the patient's trust.
The framework attempts to align the legal liability with the patient's perception of the brand.
Exactly. It forces accountability to follow the trust.
It is an incredibly intricate web. Let's trace the journey of that medical file one last time to see the full picture.
Sounds good.
You walk into a hospital. Your data is first secured by an internal air traffic control tower where the IT experts, the privacy officers, and the clinical safety officers work as one unit.
Because they know a digital server crash could mean a physical crisis in the ICU.
Right. Then, if your data needs to leave the building for an MRI analysis or a remote surgery, it moves through a pipeline heavily regulated by joint fiduciary contracts, which clearly define exactly who is liable at every millimeter of the transmission.
Yes, no vague boundaries allowed.
And even the specialist standing in your room might be an independent freelancer, acting as their own data entity when they review your chart on their iPad.
A microfiduciary.
Exactly. And overseeing all of this, the main hospital, the remote clinics, the local franchisees might be a super data fiduciary, an umbrella brand legally bound to enforce massive security standards down the entire chain.
It is a remarkable hidden infrastructure. The framework maps out thousands of invisible legal and technical handshakes happening behind the scenes of every single clinical encounter.
Which leaves me with a final thought to ponder. We started this deep dive wanting a single person holding a single key to our medical file.
We did.
But the reality is that there are hundreds of hands on the safe. So if a major healthcare brand is officially designated as a super data fiduciary, does our immense trust in that single overarching logo actually mask the reality of just how many independent actors, from local franchise owners to freelance doctors, are constantly passing our most intimate secrets back and forth?
It really makes you think. The illusion of a single key is comforting, but understanding the tangled web is what actually keeps your data safe.
It really is. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.